Welcome to this webinar that will introduce you to developmental relationships. Shipra Paniker and I will be presenting this webinar. We are colleagues from Communities and Schools of Chicago, which is a nonprofit working to remove barriers that stand in the way of student success. I am the Director of Clinical and SEL Services and have almost 30 years of experience working as a social worker in schools, as a school social worker, and as supervising folks who provide direct services in schools. So schools are an incredibly important institution, and supporting the people, the students, the teachers, the staff, the administrators, the parents who walk the halls of school buildings every day, that really is my passion. And what I have learned about developmental relationships for the past 7 years has informed my work, and I'm excited to share it with you all. I'll pass it to Shipra so you can hear a bit about her.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. So I am Shipra Paniker. I am also a clinical social worker and work for Communities and Schools of Chicago. I am the Senior Director of Intensive Student Supports, which means that I oversee all of our school-based programming, which is currently in 39 school sites. I'm really excited to be on this webinar with Lo. I don't have nearly as much experience as she does, but I am thankful to be here alongside her and learning from her. I like to say that I've been working in education since I was a kid myself and have been formally in the field for close to 15 years now. As Lo said, developmental relationships also informs my daily practice, and both of us are so excited to share what we've learned with you. With that being said, our workshop objectives for today are to list and describe the elements of the Developmental Relationships Framework. What is it? What are the elements? And how did the Developmental Relationships Framework really come to be? We're also going to talk a little more practically about how to apply the Developmental Relationships Framework and elements to our everyday work. Both Lo and I love to leave people with tangible tools and strategies, and we hope that we can do that for you today. So let's start from the beginning. To get us in the mindset of developmental relationships, we are all going to take a few minutes to think about one or two supportive, caring adults who are in our lives somewhere between the ages of 12 to 18. We all have those champions in our life who really furthered our success, whether that was a parent, a teacher, a coach, a spiritual leader, an after-school care provider, someone in our lives who believed in us. So take a few minutes, think about it. For me, someone that comes immediately to mind is my 8th grade English teacher, Mr. Johnson. He used to bring his guitar into class. He would sing to us. He taught us how to think really deeply, and he treated us like adults. He was very honest. It was clear that he cared about us. And he is someone that I think about and reference and talk about and talk to this day. He was so wonderful, and I cannot imagine my educational career without him. How about you, Lo?
Thanks. For me, it's really the people I think about are my grandparents. We didn't live in the same state, but it was close enough that I did get to see them a lot. They were always excited to see me. They wanted to hear about my life. They were interested in what I had to say, which as a young person was a big deal to me. And they were just really there for me. They cared about what was important to me, and they helped me figure out how to do those things. I will also say I also had a coach in high school who really pushed me, which I didn't always love, but it definitely got me to new places in my sport. And he also really made practices fun. So it was hard and fun. So those are the people that I think about when I think about who was part of my success village.
Thanks for sharing. And as we're going through this webinar, we're going to encourage you to keep those people in mind because that's really what a developmental relationship is. It's about having a stable, caring adult in your life as a young person.
So Search Institute is a nonprofit organization. It's been around since the 60s, and they work to bridge research and practice in order to help young people thrive and become their best selves. So what Search really, their big question always is, what they want to know is what helps make young people become successful. And that's what led them to develop and create the Developmental Relationships Framework. So here we go, learning about the framework, which is a resource for all of you to use in your daily work with students. So in order to develop this framework, Search did extensive research. They did like a comprehensive literature review. They used focus groups to hear from young people. They wanted to know what young people are experiencing in the relationships that change their lives for the better, so that they can replicate that, right? We all want to replicate those positive experiences. And they also analyzed data from their earlier research that they did to create developmental assets, which some of you may have heard about. So Search used all this information, then they built surveys that they administered to more than 25,000 young people in grades 6 through 12 who attended public schools. They did that in order to learn what youth are saying about their relationships with adults and peers and how these relationships are connected to really important positive outcomes.
And with that being said, this is some of the data that came out of those surveys. So like Lo mentioned, over 25,000 adolescents from grades 6 through 12 were surveyed. And what the Search Institute found, as you can see from this, is that the more developmental relationships a young person has in their life, the more they are developing those vitally important social emotional skills. So, for example, you can see on the side that says 0, if a young person identified having no developmental relationships in their lives, their ability to, make decisions, be as caring, be as responsible, that was a little bit lower than what we're seeing with young people on the other side who identified 5 developmental relationships in their lives. I think this graphic is pretty easy in order to point that out. And also, I'm going to ask Lo to jump in here with any other observations or thoughts about the data.
Just say that I think it's what for me, what's really important about this data is that the young people were, these are self-reports, right? So the self-reports of the young people saying, I don't have any of these developmental relationships in my life, they were also self-reporting on how they rated themselves in terms of the caring or responsibility or decision making. So it wasn't someone else looking at them and saying, oh, that young person isn't good at making decisions. This was where the young people rated themselves, and then it was correlated with how many developmental relationships they have.
And you can see really that upward trend. So for example, young people with 2 developmental relationships still had statistically significant higher levels of each of those outcomes than those with 1 identified developmental relationship, for example. The other things to just note in general about this data is that we are comparing means. If you can think back to what that means in math, it means an average. And like Lo said, this is all self-report. Anything else you would add, Lo?
I don't think so.
And here, what we can see in the data is also that the more developmental relationships a young person identified, the lower their levels or likelihood of engaging in things like alcohol use within the past 30 days, tobacco use within the past 30 days, or any kind of attempted self-harm. All of those were statistically lower than if a young person identified not having any developmental relationships in their lives. So in the last set of data, we saw that positive impact. The more developmental relationships you have in your life, or a young person has, the more likely they were to develop all of these really positive and wonderful skills. Here, we're seeing kind of similarly, the more caring relationships, the more developmental relationships a young person has, the less likely they are to engage in what we might consider kind of those risky or not so great behaviors. Anything that you would add, Lo?
No, I think you really covered it, Shipra. Thank you.
Lo loves talking about the data, so I always want to throw it over to her as well.
I appreciate that. And speaking of data, we have some more data for you. Some of just other important information that Search learned about young people from the surveys is about the number of developmental relationships they have in their lives. So the good news is that 16% of young people, again, grades 6 through 12, reported that they have strong relationships with all 5 groups they were asked about. So the different groups are parents, siblings, friends, teachers, and program leaders. And program leaders would be like coaches or spiritual advisors, after school coordinators, theater directors, mentors, all those kinds of people. So if a young person reported, if we can just stay on the first one, perfect, fabulous. So if a young person reported experiencing 4 of the 5 elements of a developmental relationship, either often or very often, the young person was considered to have a developmental relationship. So again, 16% saying, yep, I'm getting those 5 elements from my parents, my siblings, my peers, my teachers, and like a program leader. So that part is great. The not so great news in the next slide is that 22% of the young people surveyed indicated they did not have that strong caring relationship with any of those groups. So not with parents, not with teachers, siblings, friends, or program leaders. And what that tells us is that we have work to do. So in the next slide, it's just showing us this data in a different way, saying that that's about 1 out of 5 young people who were surveyed reported not having any developmental relationship. And again, I take this data to mean that we adults, we can do better about supporting the students in our schools so that they can thrive and be successful. The more we learn about what helps them be successful, the more youth we can reach. And that's really what developmental relationships is all about. And that's what we're going to continue to discuss in this webinar.
Absolutely. We all come to this work with the goal of supporting young people, of helping students succeed, making sure they're on track and that they have everything they need to be fully formed human beings by the time they leave us through their educational career. And the thing that is so great, and we're going to talk about this as we go through the webinar about the Developmental Relationships Framework, is that these are things that we are probably already doing every single day without even realizing it. So this research, this framework, it's really helping us put, like Lo said, kind of that data more into practice and bringing it more into our awareness. So the Search Institute has also conducted really extensive research on the importance of relationships specifically between children and parents. So here you're going to see some data from a little over 1,000 parenting adults with a young person ages 3 to 13. And what the Search Institute found is that the quality of parent-child relationships is 10 times more powerful than demographics in predicting whether children are developing critical social emotional skills that they need for success in life. And when we talk about demographics, this means age, gender identity, racial identity, immigration status, financial status, etc. So here, really what we're talking about is that relationships are so powerful again, and you'll hear us continue to reinforce this throughout the webinar. Demography is not destiny, is really what the Search Institute found and continues to find through their research. The quality of those relationships, that is really what's important in making sure our young people are set up for success. So moving right along, this is coming from the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child from Harvard University. And this quote says, whether the burdens come from the hardships of poverty, the challenges of parental substance abuse or serious mental illness, the stresses of war, the threats of recurrent violence or chronic negligence, or a combination of factors, the single most common finding is that children who end up doing well have had at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or other adult. When I first saw this, I was taken aback that this is coming from a university as well reputed as Harvard, based on some of the research and studies that they have done as well. And it goes back to highlight the point that we are talking about here today, that relationships are so, so powerful in setting up our young people for success. And with that being said, we are actually going to jump into what developmental relationships are. I'm going to turn it over to Lo.
So if we can pull up that quote. This is the definition that Search Institute came up with and created to really help us think about developmental relationships. And it is close connections through which young people discover who they are, gain abilities to shape their own lives, and learn how to interact with and contribute to the world around them. What I love about this definition is that it really dovetails and connects so seamlessly with human development. And when we think about adolescent development, we know that young people's, between those grades of 6 through 12, right? They're going through adolescence. They're doing their own identity work. They are wanting to figure out how they can do future planning and contribute. And they're also really realizing how they have agency in their lives. And so it's nice that this definition really connects in with that developmental stage that young people are at as well. We are now going to start getting to the nitty-gritty of what developmental relationships are. So Search Institute identified 5 key elements of a developmental relationship, and they are express care, challenge growth, provide support, share power, and expand possibilities. We're going to talk through these in more detail in the coming slides, but I want to mention that in a true developmental relationship, these elements often show up in both directions. So you might notice that you're experiencing these elements from young people as well. And we just want to emphasize the importance of adults taking the lead in these actions and of being really intentional in expressing these elements in our relationships with young people. So the first element we're going to look at is express care. What's great about this framework is that Search Institute identified the elements, they define them, and they give tangible, actionable ways to make sure that the young person experiences that element. So Search Institute, it's kind of like they show us the science behind the art of relationships, which I really appreciate. You can see that the actions of expressing care are be dependable, listen, believe in the young person, be warm and encouraging. So one way of expressing care is just showing up every day on time, ready to teach, like being dependable. That shows that the young people matter to you. Another way of expressing care is remembering things a young person told you about and asking them about it, right? So asking how the game went, right? Asking how the quinceañera was, or what was their favorite part of the movie they kept telling you they were going to go see. What was it like for them? finally, I'll just say like a high five or a smile really does go a long way with a student, especially if you're also holding that student accountable for their actions. Shipra, what are some examples of stress care that you think about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think about just welcoming students to class, especially if they have been late or absent recently, bringing them into the room with a smile, greeting them, saying, I'm so glad that you're here, and encouraging them to join the class wherever the class is. So again, just expressing that care. I'm being warm, I'm encouraging you. And these are probably things that, like we said earlier, you will do every day without even realizing it. So, moving right along, the next element is challenge growth. And when we think about this, this is really thinking about pushing a young person to keep getting better. So, things like expecting their best, stretching, holds me accountable, holding that young person accountable, stretch them to grow and learn, and helping reflect on any kinds of failures. Things that I think about really specifically are reminding students of classroom expectations if they get off track, talking with students about their potential for success, and even simply sharing that you believe in them and believe that they can be successful. And talking with students really openly about where you've seen them be successful, and at the same time, what their areas of growth are and how they can continue pushing and growing and challenging themselves in those areas as well. What about you, Lo? What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, it makes me, challenge growth really makes me think of a particular student that I used to work with. He had a ton of talents, and he also just was a shyer student. So I really pushed him to consider getting out of his comfort zone, and running for student council because he had really great ideas. And I was like, don't keep your ideas to yourself, share them with everyone. So he did run, and he unfortunately didn't get voted on to student council, but we were able to talk about it. Um, and really, what he got out of that experience is that he really didn't even though he didn't win, he didn't see it as a failure at all. He really looked at it as like, I tried something, and like, look what happened, right? Like he realized for himself that he could kind of overcome some shyness and try something new. And that was really the growth that he saw. And it was cool to see him not, uh, it was really cool to see him learn and grow from it.
Great, thank you. As we move right along, the next element is provide support. So we're really thinking about this as helping to complete tasks and achieve goals, navigating, empowering young people, advocating and helping them advocate for themselves, setting boundaries. Things that I think about with this element specifically are, especially with our younger kiddos, helping them navigate maybe those peer-to-peer conflicts. How can I resolve something more constructively and positively? Encouraging students to problem solve independently first, and then stepping in if they're getting stuck or providing that guidance. We're letting them try on their own. We're empowering them to try on their own. And we're still going to be here to help them succeed. And finally, really supporting and encouraging students to advocate for themselves and offering to go with them if they are going to advocate with someone else on their behalf, or helping them kind of develop the language for that. Those are also things that our young people can take with them long after they stop working or interacting with us. What about you, Lo? What comes to mind?
Yeah, I love how setting boundaries is part of providing support because I think a lot of times people think of boundaries as like constraining them, like you're making my life harder by setting this boundary. And I think if we really help reframe that for young people and help them understand the importance of boundaries, that can really help them understand how you're actually supporting them. I have a couple of examples. One, just being kind of like a pretty basic way, right? Like we set up a boundary saying no running in the classroom. And the reason we do that is for safety, right? We don't want, it gets too wild. If people are running around the classroom, it's too much and someone could get hurt. So we're setting that boundary so that we're supporting all of the students being safe in our classroom. So that's just a basic example. But another example of setting a boundary is really around, say we do this all the time, right? We give assignments, they're due on a certain date. Say a student comes to you and says, I need some more time. And you agree to sort of shift that boundary a little bit and say, yeah, you can have this extension, right? And say then they still don't turn it in. Then I think the way that we really do provide support and help a young person with understanding these boundaries is by talking through with them how you gave them that extension, the deadline, for a reason, because you wanted them to be able to still complete that task and that assignment. But you also need to continue to set that deadline and hold them to it, because that's part of their learning as well, being able to follow through in the deadlines and tasks that are given.
Yeah, absolutely.
So sharing power. Here we go. What does it look like? It looks like treating a young person with respect, giving them a say, including them, collaborating with them, and letting them lead. So when I've talked with teachers over the years, they've given me some examples of what it looks like in their classrooms. Examples like asking students to assess their own progress, giving options and choices, right? You can do this or you can do that, and not giving that third option that you don't want them to have, right? But they still get two options. And also really being mindful of body language and voice tone. I know that when I've shared power with young people by asking them, like, well, what do you think the consequences of your actions should be? A lot of times they will be harder on themselves than the dean or the disciplinarian would be. So it really can be like a great teaching moment for the youth and for you. Um, Shipra, tell me, what are some of your ideas?
Yeah, when I think about things like letting me lead, I think about things like providing our young people with leadership opportunities, no matter how big or small. So, for example, showing that you trust a young person by asking them to go pick something up from the main office if you need it, or asking and inviting a student to, pass out papers, put something up on the board. Whatever the case may be, again, it doesn't matter how big or small. That is a way to really include our young people in their learning environment and, again, share that power and, in some ways, responsibility for the learning environment.
Yeah, before we switch to to the last one, expand possibilities, one more thing I did want to say about sharing power is that sometimes this element seems like the hardest one. Just even the phrase share power can be a little off-putting, right? And I really want to encourage everyone to take the time to consider how you are already demonstrating this element with your students. Because usually when you do take a few minutes, you realize you are sharing power in some ways. And you also can realize that you can share power in ways you haven't yet been doing it without reducing your authority. Because I think that's the part that people want to make sure that they still, as teachers or as adults in a building, you want to make sure that you're maintaining your authority as that adult. And I think over the years, Shipper and I have both heard from many, many teachers about how to navigate that and do that successfully. All right, we have one more element left, which is expand possibilities. Connect me with people and places that enlarge my world, right? This is such an important element. It really allows us to provide youth with connections and support that can continue even when we're not in their lives every day. It's really about inspiring, broadening horizons, and connecting young people with resources that allow them to thrive. So one example of expanding possibilities could be having a conversation with a young person about their interests and expressing your own excitement that they might turn that into a hobby or even a career. Um, it could be as, this I think is something that teachers don't even think necessarily about. It feels so commonplace, but like bring scheduling a field trip and having young people go to a new place or learn about a new something they just haven't experienced before is really what Expand Possibilities is all about. Um, Another example is just sharing your own journey about how you got to where you are professionally, right? And having them understand what you went through. A lot of times young people think we just like popped into their worlds like whole, and we all had our own journeys as well. So helping them understand that can be really useful. Helping a young person increase their love of reading or science is another great example of expanding possibilities. It's part of your everyday job, and it's probably part of why you decided to work in schools in the first place.
Absolutely. And something that I often think about, like Lo was saying, with asking a young person kind of what their interests are or what they might even want to do in the future, is then even potentially taking that step to direct them to a website or to a job opportunity or an internship opportunity. So helping make those connections, again, no matter how big or small. I think the amount of times I have told a young person that, oh, this job actually exists and you could make a career out of something you love, I never expected it. And to see their eyes kind of light up to even know that something is a possibility is a way for us to expand their possibilities. Our young people don't know what they don't know. And that's really what I love about this particular element is that just even having that conversation about, again, a career or their interests or whatever the case may be, that's a way to do this element very easily.
Yep. So now you've learned about the 5 elements that go into a developmental relationship, and we know it's not possible to engage with every student on every element every day. But these elements are a great way for you to help your young people thrive beyond the content that you're teaching them. And I know Shipper is going to tell us about another educator who has really made that her lasting legacy.
Absolutely. So we are going to take some time to watch Dr. Rita Pearson's TED Talk. If you have seen this before, wonderful. I think I've seen this probably 20 or more times, and every time I watch this, I learn something new. So Rita Pearson really talks about her relationships, her own relationships, her relationship with her mother, her career as an educator. Dr. Rita Pearson is no longer with us, but like Lo said, her lasting legacy is as an educator, an advocate of educators, and someone who really dedicated her life to bringing developmental relationships to life. As we are watching this video, we're going to encourage you all to just take a mental note of any of those elements of the developmental relationships framework that you hear Dr. Pearson talking about. And with that,
I have spent my entire life either at the schoolhouse, on the way to the schoolhouse, or talking about what happened in the schoolhouse. Both my parents were educators. My maternal grandparents were educators. And for the past 40 years, I've done the same thing. And so, needless to say, over those years, I've had a chance to look at education reform from a lot of perspectives. Some of those reforms have been good, some of them have been not so good. And we know why kids drop out. We know why kids don't learn. It's either poverty, low attendance, negative peer influences. We know why. But one of the things that we never discuss, or we rarely discuss, is the value and importance of human connection. Relationships. James Comer says that no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. George Washington Carver says all learning is understanding relationships. Everyone in this room has been affected by a teacher or an adult. For years, I have watched people teach. I have looked at the best and I've looked at some of the worst. A colleague said to me one time, they don't pay me to like the kids. They pay me to teach a lesson. The kids should learn it. I should teach it. They should learn it. Case closed. Well, I said to her, you know, kids don't learn from people they don't like. That's just a bunch of hooey. And I said to her, well, your year is going to be long and arduous, dear. Needless to say, it was. Some people think that you can either have it in you to build a relationship or you don't. I think Stephen Covey had the right idea. He said you ought to just throw in a few simple things, like seeking first to understand as opposed to being understood. Simple things like apologize. You ever thought about that? Tell a kid you're sorry, they're in shock. I taught a lesson once on ratios. I'm not real good with math, but I was working on it. And I got back and looked at that teacher edition. I taught the whole lesson wrong. So I came back to class the next day and I said, look, guys, I need to apologize. I taught the whole lesson wrong. I'm so sorry. They said, that's okay, Miss Pearson. You were so excited. We just let you go. I have had classes that were so low, so academically deficient that I cried. I wondered, how am I going to take this group in 9 months from where they are to where they need to be? And it was difficult. It was awfully hard. How do I raise the self-esteem of a child and his academic achievement at the same time? One year I came up with a bright idea. I told all my students, you were chosen to be in my class because I am the best teacher and you are the best students. They put us all together so we could show everybody else how to do it. One of the students said, really? I said, really? We have to show the other classes how to do it. So when we walk down the hall, people will notice us. So you can't make noise. You just have to strut. And I gave him a saying to say, I am somebody. I was somebody when I came. I'll be a better somebody when I leave. I am powerful and I am strong. I deserve the education that I get here. I have things to do, people to impress, and places to go. And they said, yeah. You say it long enough, it starts to be a part of you. And so I gave a quiz, 20 questions. Student missed 18. I put a +2 on his paper and a big smiley face. He said, Miss Pearson, is this an F? I said, yes. He said, then why'd you put a smiley face? I said, because you on the roll. You got 2 right, you didn't miss them all. I said, and when we review this, won't you do better? He said, yes, ma'am, I can do better. You see, -18 sucks all the life out of it. +2 said, I ain't all bad. For years, I watched my mother take the time at recess to review, go on home visits in the afternoon, buy combs and brushes and peanut butter and crackers to put in her desk drawer for kids that needed to eat, and a washcloth and some soap for the kids who didn't smell so good. See, it's hard to teach kids who stink. And kids can be cruel. And so she kept those things in her desk, and years later, after she retired, I watched some of those same kids come through and say to her, you know, Miss Walker, you made a difference in my life. You made it work for me. You made me feel like I was somebody when I knew at the bottom I wasn't. And I want you to just see what I've become. And when my mama died 2 years ago at 92, there were so many former students at her funeral. It brought tears to my eyes, not because she was gone, but because she left a legacy of relationships that could never disappear. Can we stand to have more relationships? Absolutely. Will you like all your children? Of course not. And you know your toughest kids are never absent. Never. You won't like them all, and the tough ones show up for a reason. It's the connection, it's the relationships. And while you won't like them all, the key is they can never, ever know it. So teachers become great actors and great actresses, and we come to work when we don't feel like it, and we listen to policy that doesn't make sense, and we teach anyway. We teach anyway because that's what we do. Teaching and learning should bring joy. How powerful would our world be if we had kids who were not afraid to take risks, who were not afraid to think, and who had a champion? Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. Is this job tough? You betcha. Oh God, you betcha. But it is not impossible. We can do this. We're educators. We're born to make a difference. Thank you so much.
While you're getting us back to our slide deck, I'll just say it is always like, I could listen to that every day. I feel like it's such a powerful TED Talk. And you can just imagine how many young people's lives are better because Dr. Pearson was in them.
Absolutely. So while I'm also getting us back to our slide deck, Lo, were there any elements of the developmental relationships framework that you noticed? Because I noticed a ton.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that's really great about this particular TED Talk is she's just describing what she's doing or what her mom is doing seamlessly, and we can pull out those elements. So one of my favorite examples is when she talks about how she wants this one of her classes to strut down the hallway, and she talks that through with them, and I really see that as a way of her sharing power, because yes, she knows that they need to walk down the hallway in a certain way, but rather than say be quiet, this is how you're doing it, she like gives them the option of how they want to present themselves to the rest of the school. As you know, they are the smartest kids in the school is what she said, and so they need to show that. So I love that way that she kind of flips the rule about how we are in the hallway and uses that as an opportunity to share power with her students.
Absolutely. And I love hearing her talk about the quiz and how she really challenged growth with that student to say, you got 2 right. You are on a roll, not 100% wrong. And the next time we review this, you are going to be that much better. And the point that she makes about the difference between a -18 and a +2, it's something I never really thought about. So I love hearing her say that this is still a way that we can talk to our young people like, okay, you do need to do a little bit better. And also, you're on your way. You are going to get there, and I believe in you. So moving right along, like we mentioned earlier, Lo and I love to leave people with some tangible things they can think about and do in their own practice. So we are going to go over one of both of our favorite developmental relationships activities, and this is called Sparks. So a spark is a talent, an activity. It's something that lights us up, and it's something that we're passionate about. It's something that really comes from inside of us, and when we express it, it gives us joy and energy. We feel alive. It's a fundamental part of who we are. This is a really great way to express care. It's also a really cool way to provide support as you are hearing potentially about what a student's spark is, even encouraging them to potentially expand their possibilities, to think about about what this could mean long term, provide them that support in even getting to that point, and again, taking an interest by expressing care in what a young person loves. One of my sparks is reading. I love to read. I have a very active imagination, and I love being able to just kind of get into this world of books. I love talking about books. I've been part of book clubs. It's something that just lights me up on the inside. And so talking about that or sharing that with others is something that I love doing. And I love when people ask, what are your interests? And so I can share that. How about you, Lo? I know you have some sparks.
I do have a spark. One that something that for me has just been a spark ever since I was a young person is writing haikus. That they're quick. It's 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. I can do it when I'm sitting in traffic. I can be thinking about a haiku that I'm writing, or I used to do it when I was sitting on the subway all the time. I really it's for one thing about sparks, but that I think about sparks is it's when you're doing it, time sort of stands still and you don't realize how much time has passed. So I'm sure for you, Shipper, you can read like a couple chapters of a book and be like, oh my gosh, it's as though time stood still. And that's for me, writing haikus is one of those things. I love it. I get so much out of it. There's fun with like wordplay, whatever. It just really feeds my soul. And I think an important part of sparks is that having them is important for all of us, right? When we think about our own sparks, obviously both Shipper and I lit up talking about them, and that's important. We want young people to have that same feeling of excitement and joy. So learning about young people's sparks is really important. And I know that search also found that many young people reported that no one in their school buildings know what their sparks are. So it's just a really great conversation starter to have, because people like talking about themselves. Young people like doing it too.
Absolutely. We like to include this activity because it's also very low effort. This is not something you have to build into a lesson plan. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn out conversation. This can be as simple as talking to a young person, in the middle of a transition or when you are entering or exiting the classroom, before the school day starts, after the school day ends, and continuing to build on anything that you've heard about a young person's spark is a way to continue expressing that care.
So an important part of the developmental relationships framework is being intentional and inclusive. And it really goes hand in hand with being a strong relationship builder. So there are ways to be both intentional about engaging in developmental relationships with students and being inclusive. And in the next slide, we're going to kind of really look at that. So being intentional means being planful about how to build a relationship. And Shipper, the next slide just really kind of lays it all out there. So again, being planful about how you're building a relationship, being aware of how you're interacting with a student, and then taking time to debrief with yourself after you've had that interaction with a student or a group of students. Asking yourself, like, did I focus on a particular element? Did I provide support the way I planned? What went well with my interaction? And are there ways I can improve? So that idea of not just kind of blindly going through an interaction, but being intentional around it, is a really great way to deepen your developmental relationships with students. And the other component is being inclusive, which really means working to build relationships with all the students in your class or on your caseload. Think about if you're building relationships with boys and girls equitably, or is one group easier for you to build relationships with, or one group harder, right? Be mindful about that. Consider if you're building relationships with diverse learners, with the loud students, I have that loud in quotes, or with the quiet students, right? We sometimes gravitate towards particular groups of students, and being inclusive is about noticing this and making sure that we're working to build relationships with all the students that we interact with. We can really have the most impact with young people when we think about how we want to provide the elements of the framework and when we make sure we're really reaching all students. I don't know if you have anything else to add about that, Shipra.
No, I think this is, like you said, the most important part is actually kind of going into our relationships with young people, having some sort of plan and following up on that plan.
Yeah, great. And I think what's nice too is we just lean on those elements, right? You can have them printed up in your classroom and just like have them there so that you're reminding yourself about that. One activity that we always like to leave people with at the end, which is why it's an exit slip, is to really take a few minutes to think about one student or one element that you want to focus on over the next few weeks. Think about how you're going to be intentional in that relationship with the student and create an action plan for yourself. Or think about what element you really want to make sure you're providing for students. It could be the one that like is harder for you, or just that you forget about, it slips your mind more. So thinking about how you want to be intentional around using this framework in the next few weeks is really important. It's even better if you can get yourself an accountability buddy. So if you're watching this with more with a coworker, or you know that a coworker just watched it, to be able to say, hey, can you please hold me accountable? Check in with me. Have I been intentional around my developmental relationships? The last thing I'll say is that it's also really important to think about those groups of students that I was talking about before that might sometimes fall through the cracks for you, and just really consider how you want to make sure you're including them in your developmental relationships work as well. So hopefully you've jotted down either a student or an element and will hold yourself accountable or find someone to help you stay accountable towards deepening your use of the developmental relationships framework.
And with that, we have reached the end of this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. We do want to remind you to complete the survey that is attached to this webinar. That is going to mark this webinar as fully completed, and we hope that you enjoyed it. Both Lo and I, like we mentioned, love talking about developmental relationships, and we're so glad that we could bring this to you as well.